The desert stretched endlessly before Samuel McKenna as he guided his weathered horse along the rocky trail. The Arizona Territory in 1882 was unforgiving land, where the sun burned mercilessly during the day and the nights brought bone-chilling cold. Samuel had been riding for 3 days straight, his cattle scattered by Apache raiders who had swept through his small ranch like a desert storm. His blue eyes, squinting against the harsh sunlight, caught sight of smoke rising from behind a cluster of red rocks ahead. Samuel's hand instinctively moved to the Colt revolver at his hip. In this territory, smoke could mean many things, and most of them spelled trouble for a lone man. As he approached the source of the smoke, Samuel dismounted and led his horse on foot, moving carefully between the towering sandstone formations. The acrid smell of burning wood mixed with something else, something that made his stomach turn. He rounded a large boulder and stopped dead in his tracks. Before him lay the remains of a small Apache camp. 3 teepees had been reduced to smoldering ashes, and scattered belongings told the story of a hasty retreat or something worse. Samuel's experienced eyes read the signs like words on a page. This wasn't a planned departure. This was an attack. Bootprints in the soft earth told him that soldiers had been here, probably from Fort Apache. The cavalry had a reputation for striking Apache camps without warning, often not distinguishing between hostile warriors and peaceful families. Samuel felt a familiar knot form in his stomach. He had seen too much senseless violence in his 35 years on the frontier. A soft whimper caught his attention. Samuel froze, listening intently. There it was again, coming from behind a pile of scattered baskets and torn blankets. He approached slowly, his hand ready on his weapon, not knowing what he might find. Behind the debris, huddled against a large rock, was a young Apache woman. She couldn't have been more than 20 years old, with long black hair that fell across her face like a curtain. Her traditional dress was torn and dusty, and Samuel could see dark stains that looked suspiciously like blood on the fabric. She looked up at him with eyes that held a mixture of fear and defiance. Despite her obvious terror, she lifted her chin and stared directly at him, refusing to show weakness. Samuel had encountered Apache warriors before, and he recognized that same fierce pride even in this frightened young woman. "I won't hurt you," Samuel said softly, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. He didn't know if she understood English, but his tone was gentle and reassuring. The woman studied his face carefully, searching for signs of deception. Samuel remained perfectly still, letting her evaluate him. He had learned long ago that patience was often the difference between life and death on the frontier. After what felt like an eternity, she spoke in heavily accented English. "The blue coats, they came at dawn. My people, they are gone." Samuel felt his heart clench at the pain in her voice. He had witnessed the aftermath of cavalry raids before, and they rarely ended well for the Apache families caught in their path. The woman's relatives were likely dead or captured, leaving her completely alone in this harsh wilderness. "What's your name?" Samuel asked gently, crouching down to bring himself closer to her level. "Ayanna," she whispered, the name flowing like music despite her fear. "It means eternal blossom." Samuel nodded respectfully. "I'm Samuel McKenna. I have a ranch about 20 miles south of here." He gestured toward the horizon. "You're hurt. Let me help you." Ayanna shook her head vigorously. "I cannot trust white man. Your people. They did this." Samuel understood her suspicion completely. The relationship between white settlers and Apache tribes had been strained for decades, marked by broken treaties, misunderstandings, and violence on both sides. He couldn't blame her for viewing him as a potential enemy. "Not all white men are the same," Samuel said quietly. "Just like not all Apache are the same. Some of us just want to live in peace." Something in his tone seemed to reach her, because Ayanna's rigid posture relaxed slightly. She studied his face again, noting the weathered lines around his eyes and the genuine concern in his expression. Samuel McKenna didn't look like the hard-faced soldiers who had destroyed her world that morning. "I have nowhere to go," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "My father, my brothers, all dead. My mother and sisters taken by the blue coats." Tears finally began to flow down her dirt-streaked cheeks. "I am alone." Samuel felt something stirred deep in his chest. He had been alone himself for so long that he had almost forgotten what it felt like to care about another person's pain. His wife Mary had died of fever 3 years earlier, leaving him to work his small ranch with only his loyal dog Rex for company. "You don't have to be alone," he heard himself saying. I have food, clean water, and a safe place to rest. You can stay until you decide what you want to do. Ayanna looked at him with surprise. In her experience, white men took what they wanted from Apache women, without offering anything in return. This rancher was different somehow, and her instincts told her that he was speaking the truth. Why would you help me? She asked suspiciously. What do you want in return? Samuel considered her question carefully. What did he want? Companionship, perhaps. Someone to talk to besides his horse and his dog. Someone who might understand the loneliness that had been eating away at his soul since Mary's death. Nothing, he said simply. Just the chance to do something right, in a world that seems to have forgotten what right means. Ayanna studied his face one more time, searching for any hint of deception. She found none. Against her better judgment and everything her people had taught her about trusting white men, she felt herself beginning to believe him. I am injured, she admitted, lifting her arm to reveal a deep gash along her forearm, where a soldier's saber had caught her during her escape. I cannot ride far. Samuel examined the wound with experienced eyes. He had treated many injuries during his years on the frontier, both human and animal. The cut was deep but clean, and if properly cared for, it would heal without serious complications. I can take care of that, he assured her. I have medical supplies back at my ranch. Ayanna nodded slowly, making a decision that would change both of their lives forever. I will come with you, Samuel McKenna, but if you betray my trust, she let the threat hang in the air unfinished. You have my word, Samuel replied solemnly. No harm will come to you while you're under my protection. As Samuel helped Ayanna to her feet, he couldn't help but notice how small and delicate she seemed, despite her obvious inner strength. Her people had taught her to be tough and self-reliant, but she was still just a young woman who had lost everything in a single morning. The ride back to Samuel's ranch was slow and careful. Ayanna rode behind him on his horse, her injured arm cradled against her chest. She remained alert and watchful, scanning the horizon for any signs of danger. Trust might be growing between them, but survival instincts died hard on the frontier. As they traveled, Samuel found himself acutely aware of her presence behind him. It had been so long since he had shared his space with another person that he had almost forgotten what human companionship felt like. The warmth of her body against his back and the soft sound of her breathing reminded him of feelings he thought had died with his wife. When they finally reached Samuel's modest ranch as the sun was setting, Ayanna looked around with curious eyes. The small wooden house was simple but well-maintained, with a barn, a corral for horses, and a vegetable garden that showed signs of careful tending. It wasn't much, but it was clearly a home where someone took pride in their work. Samuel's dog Rex came bounding out to greet them, his tail wagging enthusiastically. To Samuel's surprise, Ayanna didn't flinch away from the large animal. Instead, she extended her good hand for him to sniff, speaking to him in soft Apache words that seemed to calm the excited dog immediately. He likes you, Samuel observed as Rex settled down beside Ayanna, looking up at her with adoring eyes. Animals know when someone means no harm, Ayanna replied simply. They see more clearly than people sometimes. Samuel helped her down from the horse and led her toward the house. As they reached the front door, Ayanna hesitated for a moment, looking back toward the darkening desert where her old life had ended just hours before. Once I enter your house, she said quietly, I cannot go back to who I was before. My people will consider me lost to them. Samuel understood the gravity of what she was saying. By accepting his help and entering his home, she would be crossing a line that her culture might never allow her to uncross. She would become an outsider to her own people, forever changed by this choice. The choice is yours, he said gently. I won't force you to do anything you don't want to do. Ayanna looked at the warm light glowing through the windows of Samuel's house, then back at the cold darkness of the desert. Her old life was gone whether she entered this house or not. Her family was dead or captured, her village destroyed. She could wander the desert alone and probably die within days, or she could take a chance on this strange white man who had shown her more kindness in one afternoon than she had expected to find anywhere. Please, she said softly, so quietly that Samuel almost didn't hear her. I crave a man's comfort, the comfort of knowing I am not alone in this world. Samuel felt his heart skip a beat at her words. There was something achingly vulnerable in her voice, a raw honesty that cut straight through all the barriers he had built around his own heart since Mary's death. He opened the door and stepped aside, letting her make the final choice for herself. Ayanna took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders with quiet dignity, and stepped across the threshold into Samuel McKenna's home and into a new chapter of her life that would test everything she thought she knew about love, loyalty, and survival on the American frontier. The interior of Samuel's house was simple but comfortable. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, with handmade furniture arranged around it. Ayanna noticed personal touches that spoke of a woman's presence, though dust on some surfaces suggested she had been gone for some time. A photograph on the mantelpiece showed Samuel with a pretty blonde woman, both of them smiling at the camera. "That was my wife, Mary," Samuel said quietly, following her gaze. "She died 3 years ago during the fever outbreak that swept through the territory." Ayanna nodded with understanding. Death was no stranger to either of their peoples. "She was beautiful," she said simply. "You must miss her very much." Samuel felt a familiar ache in his chest at the mention of Mary, but somehow it didn't hurt quite as much as it usually did. Perhaps having someone to share the memory with made it easier to bear. "Let me tend to your wound," he said, changing the subject. He retrieved a wooden box from a shelf near the kitchen, revealing an impressive collection of medical supplies. Life on the frontier had taught him to be prepared for injuries of all kinds. Ayanna sat carefully in a chair near the fireplace, extending her injured arm toward him. Samuel lit an oil lamp and examined the cut more closely. It was deeper than he had initially thought, but the bleeding had mostly stopped. "This might sting a bit," he warned as he began cleaning the wound with alcohol. Ayanna barely flinched, her face remaining stoically calm despite what had to be considerable pain. Samuel couldn't help but admire her toughness. As he worked, wrapping clean bandages around her arm, Samuel found himself studying Ayanna's face in the lamplight. Her features were delicate but strong, with high cheekbones and expressive dark eyes that seemed to hold depths of wisdom beyond her years. There was something about her that reminded him of a wild creature, beautiful but untamed. "Why do you live alone out here?" Ayanna asked as Samuel finished bandaging her wound. "Most white men have families." Samuel sat back in his chair, considering how to answer. "After Mary died, I didn't see much point in being around other people. Out here, I can work my land and mind my own business. Nobody bothers me, and I don't bother anybody. That is a lonely way to live," Ayanna observed. "So is being the last one left alive from your family," Samuel replied gently. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, both lost in their own thoughts. The fire crackled warmly in the hearth, and Rex settled down between their chairs with a contented sigh. For the first time since that morning's attack, Ayanna felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. "Are you hungry?" Samuel asked eventually. "I don't have much, but I can make some decent stew." Ayanna realized she hadn't eaten since the previous evening. "Yes, please. I would be grateful." Samuel busied himself in the kitchen, pulling together ingredients for a simple meal. Ayanna watched him work, noting how his movements were efficient and practiced. This was a man who had learned to take care of himself, but there was something almost ritualistic about the way he prepared food, as if cooking for another person was a half-forgotten skill he was trying to remember. "Tell me about your family," Samuel said as he stirred the pot. "If you want to, that is." Ayanna was quiet for so long that Samuel thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was distant and sad. "My father was a war chief named Nalnish. He believed that Apache and white men could never live in peace, that we must fight until one or the other was completely gone." She paused, staring into the fire. "My mother, Desba, was gentler. She thought there might be a way for our peoples to share this land." "What did you believe?" Samuel asked. "I thought my mother was a dreamer and my father was probably right," Ayanna admitted. "Until today. Until you showed me kindness when you had no reason to." Samuel served the stew in 2 bowls and sat down across from her. "Maybe your mother wasn't such a dreamer after all." They ate in companionable silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Ayanna found the simple meal more satisfying than any feast from her childhood. There was something nourishing about being cared for when she had expected only cruelty or indifference. "Samuel," she said eventually, setting down her empty bowl. "The soldiers who attacked our camp, they will come looking for survivors. If they find me here, they will assume you are harboring an enemy. You could be arrested, or worse." Samuel had already considered this possibility. "Let me worry about that," he said firmly. "You're under my protection now." "But why?" Ayanna pressed. You owe me nothing. My people have probably stolen your cattle, burned your neighbors' homes. Why would you risk your life for an Apache woman you just met? Samuel was quiet for a long moment, struggling to put his feelings into words. 3 years ago, when Mary was dying, I would have given anything to have someone help her, but there was no doctor for 100 miles, no medicine that could save her. I had to watch her slip away. Knowing I was helpless to stop it, he met Ayana's eyes across the table. Today I found someone who needed help, and I actually had the power to give it. Maybe that doesn't make much sense, but it feels like something I'm supposed to do. Ayana felt her throat tighten with emotion. In her culture, a man's honor was measured by his willingness to protect those weaker than himself, regardless of whether they were blood relatives or strangers. This white rancher understood that concept better than many Apache warriors she had known. You are a good man, Samuel McKenna, she said softly. Your wife was fortunate to have your love. Something shifted between them in that moment, an acknowledgement of the attraction that had been building since they first met. Both of them recognized it, and both were uncertain what to do about it. Samuel cleared his throat and stood up. You must be exhausted. You can sleep in the bedroom. I'll make do with blankets by the fire. Ayana started to protest, but Samuel held up his hand. Mary would haunt this place forever if I let a wounded woman sleep on the floor while I took the bed. The mention of his deceased wife created an awkward moment. Ayana wondered if Samuel felt guilty about the growing connection between them, as if caring for another woman somehow betrayed Mary's memory. Samuel, she said carefully. Your wife? Would she want you to be alone forever? Samuel froze in the act of clearing the dishes. It was a question he had asked himself many times over the past 3 years, usually late at night when the loneliness became almost unbearable. I don't know, he admitted. Maybe not forever. But it's only been 3 years and I still dream about her sometimes. Good, Ayana said simply. That means you loved her truly. But the dead do not need us to suffer forever in their memory. They need us to live, to find happiness again. Samuel felt something break open inside his chest, a wall he had built around his heart beginning to crumble. Is that what your people believe? My grandmother used to say that love is like water, Ayana explained. It can take many shapes, flow in different directions, but it never truly disappears, just changes form. The love you had for your wife does not become less if you find love again. It becomes part of something larger. Samuel stared at her, amazed by her wisdom and insight. Here was this young woman who had lost everything just hours ago, yet she was offering him comfort and perspective on his own grief. Thank you, he said quietly. I needed to hear that. They prepared for sleep with careful politeness, both aware of the charged atmosphere between them. Samuel gave Ayana one of Mary's nightgowns, trying not to think about how different the two women were, or how the simple white cotton would look against Ayana's darker skin. As Ayana disappeared into the bedroom, Samuel settled down near the fireplace with a pile of blankets. Rex curled up beside him, providing warmth and companionship, but sleep eluded him as he stared at the dying embers and wondered what tomorrow would bring. In the bedroom, Ayana lay awake in the soft bed, surrounded by the lingering scent of lavender soap that must have been Mary McKenna's favorite. She felt like an intruder in this sacred space. Yet, Samuel had offered it freely. The white cotton nightgown was softer than anything she had ever worn, a luxury that spoke of a gentler way of life than she had known. Through the thin walls, she could hear Samuel moving restlessly in the main room. She wondered if he was having second thoughts about helping her, or if he was simply struggling with the same confusing emotions that were keeping her awake. Despite everything that had happened, despite the loss of her family and the destruction of her old life, Ayana felt something stirring inside her that she barely recognized. For the first time in her 20 years, she was beginning to understand what her mother had meant when she spoke of the possibility of peace between their peoples. Perhaps it would start not with treaties or negotiations, but with simple human kindness shared between two lonely souls who had found each other in the vast wilderness of the Arizona Territory. Perhaps love really could bridge the gap between worlds that seemed impossibly far apart. As she finally drifted off to sleep, Ayana whispered a prayer to her ancestors, asking them to guide her through the difficult choices that lay ahead. She was walking a path no Apache woman had walked before, and she would need all the wisdom and strength she could find. In the main room, Samuel finally found sleep as well, dreaming not of Mary for the first time in 3 years, but of dark eyes that held promise of something he had thought was lost to him forever. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. But tonight there was peace in his small house on the frontier, and two hearts slowly beginning to heal. Samuel woke before dawn to the sound of movement in the kitchen. He found Ayanna already dressed, quietly preparing coffee over the stove. She had braided her long black hair and somehow managed to clean the dust and grime from her clothes, though the torn fabric still bore evidence of yesterday's violence. "You didn't have to get up so early," Samuel said, running his fingers through his hair. "You need rest to heal properly." Ayanna turned to face him, and Samuel was struck again by her natural grace and dignity. Even after everything she had endured, she carried herself like royalty. "In my family, the women rise with the sun," she explained. "It was, our way." A shadow of pain crossed her features as she corrected herself, but she pushed it aside with visible effort. Samuel understood that keeping busy was her way of dealing with grief. He had done the same thing after Mary's death, working from dawn to dusk to keep his mind occupied. They shared breakfast in companionable silence, both aware that they needed to make some decisions about Ayanna's future. The reality of their situation couldn't be ignored forever. She was an Apache woman in a white man's house, and in 1882 Arizona, that was a dangerous position for both of them. "I've been thinking," Samuel said finally. "There's a town called Prescott, about 60 miles north of here. They have a doctor who might look at your arm properly, and there's a mission there run by a woman named Sister Catherine. She helps people in difficult situations." Ayanna set down her coffee cup and studied Samuel's face. "You want me to leave?" "No," Samuel said quickly, surprised by how much he meant it. "But I want you to have choices. You can't stay hidden here forever, and I won't have you feeling trapped." "What if I don't want other choices?" Ayanna asked quietly. "What if I want to stay here with you?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that both of them understood. Samuel felt his heart race as he looked into her dark eyes and saw the same longing that had been growing inside him. "Ayanna," he said carefully, "you're vulnerable right now. You've lost everything you've ever known. I don't want to take advantage of that." She stood up abruptly, anger flashing in her eyes. "You think I am a child who cannot make her own decisions? You think I offer myself because I am weak and grateful?" Samuel realized he had insulted her without meaning to. Apache women were raised to be strong and independent, capable of making their own choices even in the most difficult circumstances. "I'm sorry," he said sincerely. "That's not what I meant. I care about you too much to rush into something we might both regret." The anger faded from Ayanna's expression, replaced by something softer and more vulnerable. "Samuel, yesterday my world ended. My family is dead, my people scattered. Everything I thought I knew about life was destroyed in a single morning." She moved closer to him, her voice dropping to an intimate whisper. "But then you found me. You showed me kindness when I expected cruelty. You made me remember that not all men are motivated by hate and violence." She reached out and touched his cheek gently. "When I said I craved a man's comfort, I was not speaking just of protection from the world. I was speaking of the comfort that comes from being truly seen and valued by another person." Samuel felt the last of his resistance crumble as he looked into her eyes. "Ayanna, if we do this, there's no going back. You could never return to your people, and I would be risking everything I've built here." "Some things are worth the risk," she said simply. "My grandmother used to say that love finds us when we need it most, often in the most unexpected places. Perhaps this is such a time." Samuel reached up and covered her hand with his own, marveling at how right it felt to touch her. "I haven't felt this way since Mary died. I wasn't sure I ever would again." "Your heart is big enough for more than one love," Ayanna assured him. "I do not ask you to forget your wife. I only ask you to make room for something new." Samuel pulled her closer, and for a moment they simply stood together, holding each other in the morning light streaming through the kitchen window. The world outside might be full of conflict and hatred, but in this small house, two people had found something precious and rare. Their first kiss was tentative and gentle, a question and an answer all at once. Samuel tasted the sweetness of coffee on her lips and felt the softness of her skin beneath his calloused hands. Ayanna melted against him, finally allowing herself to be vulnerable after a lifetime of having to be strong. "Are you sure about this?" Samuel whispered against her hair. "I have never been more sure of anything," Ayanna replied, her voice filled with quiet certainty. The next few weeks passed like a dream. Samuel taught Ayanna how to care for his small herd of cattle, and she showed him Apache techniques for tracking game and reading weather signs. They worked side by side during the day and talked long into the night, sharing stories of their different worlds and finding common ground in their shared humanity. Ayanna proved to be a quick learner and an able partner. She had an intuitive understanding of animals that impressed Samuel, and her knowledge of desert survival often proved invaluable. More importantly, she brought laughter back into his life, a sound that had been absent from his house for 3 long years. But their happiness existed in a fragile bubble that both of them knew couldn't last forever. The outside world had a way of intruding on even the most carefully protected peace. The intrusion came on a hot afternoon in late summer, in the form of dust clouds on the horizon that announced unwelcome visitors. Samuel watched through his spyglass as a patrol of cavalry soldiers approached his ranch, and his blood ran cold. "Ayanna," he called urgently. "You need to hide." Now, she appeared at his side instantly, following his gaze toward the approaching soldiers. Her face remained calm, but Samuel could see the tension in her shoulders. "The root cellar behind the house," Samuel said quickly. "Stay there no matter what you hear. Promise me." Ayanna nodded and kissed him quickly before disappearing around the back of the house. Samuel watched her go, then took a deep breath and prepared to face whatever was coming. The patrol was led by a hard-faced captain named Morrison who had a reputation for brutality in his dealings with Apache tribes. Samuel had encountered him before and hadn't liked what he saw. "McKenna," Morrison said without preamble as he dismounted. "We're tracking Apache survivors from a raid we conducted 6 weeks ago. Word is you might have seen something." "Can't say that I have," Samuel replied evenly. "Been pretty quiet out here." Morrison's cold eyes swept over the ranch, taking in every detail. "Mind if we look around? Orders are to search any property where hostiles might be hiding." Samuel's jaw tightened, but he knew he had no choice. Refusing would only increase their suspicions. "Help yourselves, Captain, though I'm not sure what you expect to find." The soldiers spread out across his property, searching the barn, the corral, and even the house itself. Samuel's heart pounded as he watched them examine every corner of his home, looking for signs of Ayanna's presence. In the root cellar, Ayanna crouched in the darkness, listening to the heavy footsteps above her head. She could hear Samuel's voice, calm and steady, answering the soldiers' questions. She knew that if she were discovered, both of their lives would be over. After what felt like hours but was probably only 30 minutes, the soldiers finished their search and regrouped near their horses. Captain Morrison seemed frustrated by their lack of success. "Strange thing," Morrison said to Samuel as he prepared to mount up. "We found the remains of an Apache camp about 20 miles north of here. Looks like at least one person escaped our initial sweep, probably a woman based on the tracks we found." Samuel kept his expression neutral. "Well, Captain, this is big country. A person could hide out here for months without being found." "True," Morrison agreed. "But winter's coming, and the desert doesn't forgive mistakes. If there is a survivor out there, she won't last long on her own." The soldiers rode away as suddenly as they had arrived, leaving Samuel alone in the settling dust. He waited until they were completely out of sight before going to retrieve Ayanna from her hiding place. He found her sitting in the darkness of the root cellar, her arms wrapped around her knees. She looked up at him with eyes that held a mixture of fear and sadness. "They're gone," Samuel said gently, helping her to her feet. "You're safe. For now," Ayanna replied. "But they will come back, Samuel. They will keep searching until they find what they're looking for." Samuel knew she was right. Captain Morrison was not the type of man to give up easily, and their ranch was an obvious place for an Apache fugitive to seek shelter. It was only a matter of time before he returned with more soldiers and a more thorough search. "What do you want to do?" Samuel asked, though he dreaded her answer. Ayanna was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the desert that stretched endlessly toward the horizon. "My grandmother used to tell stories about a place far to the south, in the mountains of Mexico. She said there were Apache families there who had found peace, who lived without fear of soldiers and raids." "Mexico is a hard journey," Samuel said. "Dangerous for a woman traveling alone." Ayanna turned to look at him, her eyes bright with tears she refused to shed. "I would not have to travel alone if you came with me." The suggestion hung between them like a bridge across an impossible chasm. Samuel felt his heart stop as he considered what she was asking. Leave his ranch, his home, everything he had built in Arizona, and start over in a foreign country. Ayana, he said slowly, I don't speak Spanish. I don't know anything about Mexico. And if we were caught at the border, I know, she said quietly. I know what I'm asking. But Samuel, we cannot build a life here. Every day we stay is another day closer to being discovered, and if they find me, she didn't need to finish the sentence. Both of them knew what happened to Apache women who were captured by the cavalry. Samuel pulled her into his arms, holding her close as he wrestled with the most difficult decision of his life. Everything logical told him to help her get to the mission in Prescott, to let Sister Catherine find her a safe place far away from him. But his heart told him something different entirely. If we do this, he said finally, there's no coming back. We'd be leaving everything behind to start completely over. Sometimes starting over is the only choice we have, Ayana replied. Besides, what is everything without someone to share it with? Samuel thought about his small ranch, his cattle, the life he had built with Mary. Then he thought about the empty years since her death, the loneliness that had eaten away at his soul until Ayana had appeared like a miracle in the desert. When would we leave? He asked. Ayana's face lit up with hope and joy. You'll come with me? I'd follow you anywhere, Samuel said simply, and meant it with every fiber of his being. They spent the next week preparing for their journey, selling what they could, and packing only the essentials. Samuel felt a pang of sadness as he looked around his home one last time, but it was tempered by excitement about the adventure that lay ahead. On their final night in Arizona, they sat together on the front porch, watching the stars come out over the desert. Rex lay at their feet, somehow sensing that big changes were coming. Are you sure about this? Samuel asked one more time. Ayana took his hand and squeezed it gently. Samuel McKenna, you saved my life when you found me in that destroyed camp. But more than that, you saved my heart. You showed me that love can exist between people who are supposed to be enemies. How could I not be sure about spending my life with you? Samuel lifted their joined hands and kissed her fingers tenderly. I love you, Ayana. Whatever happens, whatever we face in Mexico, I want you to know that. I love you too, she replied, her voice soft as silk in the desert night. And I believe that love will be enough to carry us through whatever comes next. As they prepared for bed on their last night in the house where they had found each other, both of them felt a mixture of nervousness and anticipation about the future. They were leaving everything familiar behind to chase a dream of freedom and peace in a distant land, but they were facing that uncertain future together. And that made all the difference. Love had indeed found them when they needed it most, in the most unexpected place, and now it was strong enough to carry them toward a new life filled with infinite possibilities. The next morning, they loaded their few possessions onto a sturdy wagon and set out toward the Mexican border. As they rode away from the little ranch that had sheltered their growing love, neither of them looked back. The past was behind them now, and ahead lay the promise of a future where they could build something beautiful together, free from the hatred and violence that had nearly destroyed them both. In the end, Ayana had been right about love being like water. It had found its way around all the obstacles in its path, changing form when necessary but never disappearing entirely. And now it would carry them forward into whatever adventures awaited them in the vast, beautiful, and dangerous world that stretched beyond the horizon.